Daniel had always been the kind of man who kept to himself. He worked hard, paid his bills on time, and treated people with respect. All he wanted was peace in his own home, a place where he could unwind after long days. His house wasn't anything extravagant, but it was his safe haven. That peace, however, began to unravel the moment Karen entered the picture. She lived across the street and proudly introduced herself as the president of the neighborhood HOA. From the start, she carried herself with the kind of arrogance that demanded attention. To her, the title meant she could dictate how people lived, where they parked, and even what kind of flowers should grow in their front yards. For a while, Daniel ignored her comments and her constant nitpicking about trivial matters. But then she began parking her massive SUV across his driveway. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe she had guests over, or maybe the space in front of her own house was full. But the more it happened, the more Daniel realized it wasn't an accident. Every morning when he tried to leave for work, he would find her vehicle blocking his car in. He started knocking on her door politely, asking her to move it, but Karen would roll her eyes and say, "It's just for a little while. Be patient. You don't own the street." It wasn't just a little while. It became her routine. Sometimes he'd be late for meetings, sometimes he'd have to cancel plans altogether because his car was trapped. Once, when he had a medical appointment he couldn't miss, she left him waiting almost an hour before she finally came out, coffee in hand, smirking as she strolled to her car. "Relax, Daniel," she said as if she were doing him a favor. His patience was wearing thin, but he stayed calm. He knew that exploding at her would only give her more satisfaction. Still, every time she blocked his driveway, a quiet storm brewed inside him. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel realized Karen had no intention of stopping. He noticed her smugness growing, as though trapping him in his own home gave her a sense of power. That's when he decided enough was enough. He began documenting everything. He started taking pictures every single time her SUV blocked his driveway. He noted dates, times, and even recorded short clips from his phone whenever he could. Eventually, he installed a small camera facing the street to make sure nothing escaped his evidence. Karen, of course, had no idea. To her, Daniel was just another neighbor too timid to fight back. She would laugh with her friends about how he never stood up for himself. But Daniel wasn't being timid. He was being patient. He was building a case, and, slowly but surely, he was preparing his plan. The day that would change everything came when he returned home late one evening to find not one, but two of Karen's vehicles across his driveway, her SUV and a smaller car parked right behind it. He stood there, in disbelief. This wasn't just arrogance, this was blatant harassment. He approached her house and knocked firmly. Karen opened the door with a smirk already on her face. "Oh, it's you. What now?" she said. Daniel clenched his jaw. "Karen, you're blocking my driveway again. I need you to move your cars." She crossed her arms. "Daniel, the driveway is part of the community. I'm the HOA president. That means I have authority over these things. You should be grateful your driveway is even being put to use." Her words stung with condescension, and for the first time, Daniel didn't argue back. He just nodded slightly, turned around, and walked away. That night, sitting in his study, he opened a folder on his laptop labeled Operation Disappear. Inside were months' worth of pictures, videos, and logs. He had every single incident, documented every single time-stamped photo saved. He knew the law was on his side. Trespassing and blocking a private driveway were violations he could finally act on. With a calm determination, he picked up his phone and made the call. The next morning, Karen strutted out of her house like always, keys jangling in her hand, but when she reached Daniel's driveway, she stopped dead. Her SUV wasn't there. The space was completely empty, as if the car had vanished into thin air. She looked around frantically, her face reddening by the second. "What the? Where's my car?" she shouted. A few neighbors peeked out from their windows, curious about the commotion. Karen stormed across the street and banged on Daniel's door. When he opened it, she exploded. "Where is my SUV, Daniel? Did you do this?" Daniel stayed calm, his voice even. "Karen, your SUV was trespassing on my property. I contacted the city towing services. They had every right to remove it." Karen's jaw dropped. "You had no right. I'm the HOA president. Do you know who you're messing with?" Daniel tilted his head slightly and replied, "Do you know who you're messing with? I'm the property owner, and the law doesn't bend to your title." He handed her a slip of paper, the towing report with all the details signed and sealed. Karen's hands shook as she read it. "I'll sue you," she threatened, her voice cracking. Daniel then pulled out a thick folder and opened it in front of her. Inside were dozens of printed photos, video stills, and logs of every time her car had blocked his driveway. "Try it," he said calmly. "I have the months of evidence. If you sue me, I'll countersue for trespassing and harassment. You won't just lose money. You'll lose your position in the HOA. You'll lose everything." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, she was speechless. The confrontation spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By evening, everyone had heard about how Karen's SUV had been towed away. People who had once cowered under her arrogance whispered in relief. Some even laughed quietly when they saw her pacing angrily in her front yard, humiliated and powerless. Karen's reign over the block had been broken. Daniel, meanwhile, returned to his peaceful life. He no longer had to worry about being trapped in his own driveway. Every time he sat on his porch, he felt the weight lifted from his shoulders. He didn't feel victorious in a petty way. He felt justified. He had stood his ground, but he had done it with patience and intelligence. He had proven that bullies, no matter how loud, could be defeated. Karen never blocked his driveway again. In fact, she barely even looked in his direction. The SUV that once symbolized her dominance was now remembered as the car that disappeared. Neighbors told the story again and again, and Daniel became somewhat of a quiet hero on the street. For him, though, the victory wasn't about glory. It was about freedom. His driveway was his space, his independence, and his peace of mind. And as he sat there one quiet evening, sipping his coffee while the sun dipped behind the trees, he opened his diary and wrote just 2 words: "Problem solved.